On July 24, 1995, David and Mara Blackwell, both 27, were driving on Highway 95 in Arizona on their way to Yuma from Henderson, Nevada. Their plan was to visit David's family and announce their recent elopement when Mara noticed something in the middle of the road. As they got closer, they noticed it was a young man's 17-year-old Jace Kelly. Mara made David pull over and help the young man against his wishes. They tried talking to him, but he wouldn't respond, so they put him in the car and decided to drop him off at the nearest police station, which was in Bed City. For most of the drive he wouldn't say anything. Then he suddenly asked, "What state am I in, Marlet?" And David gave each other confused looks, and David replied, "You're in Arizona. Which state do you think you're in?" "I'm supposed to be in Arkansas," he responded after dropping him off. And listening to the story he told the police, they resumed their trip to Yuma. Everything was fine until they passed Low Valley. Welcome to DarkWrought Legends. Where fear takes form and shadows tell their stories. Let's begin. That's when what was supposed to be a memorable trip turned into a living nightmare. Where Marlo was found the following day was shocking, to say the least. The details she told the sheriff's department of what took place to her and David were appalling and truly unbelievable. This is her story. I'm still wondering if this is real. I keep closing my eyes, hoping when I open them things will be back to that way they were. The nightmare started after we picked up Jace Kelly near Bullhead City. I wish we would have just driven rev around him and kept going after dropping him off and hearing his crazy story. A few hours later we got back on the road after passing Lowe's Valley. We were on the long stretch of road that goes straight for at least 20 to 25 miles with no turns or curves. I know this because we've driven this highway several times and know it well. I actually remember looking through the windshield thinking how boring this stretch was and wishing it was over already. No sooner had that thought crossed my mind, David looked over at me, asking me something. I turned to look at him, answering his question, but when we both looked back at the road, suddenly, out of nowhere, the road curved, forcing us to go right. "Damn it, what the hell!" shouted David loudly as he cranked the steering wheel hard to the right so we wouldn't go flying off the road, but it was too late. Everything seemed to slow down as we went down a hill, hitting a large rock. Luckily we didn't roll or get seriously injured. The car, of course, was now undrivable. We sat there stunned, trying to process what had just happened. "Where did that curve come from?" I asked in a terrified tone. "I have no clue, Mara," David angrily replied. "Mara, tell me I'm not imagining things. We were just on the long straight stretch after low pause." "Right," he said, looking at me anxiously. "I'm positive I was just thinking how boring that stretch is." "Right as we hit it," I responded, fighting back the tears. "Are you okay? Are you injured?" he asked. "I think I'm okay. My knee kind of hurts though," I replied. "Are you sure that's it? Nothing else?" he asked. I nodded, my head showing him I was fine. "Let's flag someone down," said David as he opened his door and got out. He then came around to my side, opened the door, giving me his hand. "We should get away from the car in case it happens to catch fire," he said. I said nothing as I climbed out, still holding his hand. We then struggled as we climbed up the soft, steep dirt hill. When we got to the top, what I saw next took me by surprise. Not only did the road curve, but on the other side, about 50 yards off, was a green and white camping trailer. We looked at each other, knowing something was not right. As I looked around, the area didn't look at all familiar to me. It looked like we were still in Arizona, but the landscape had changed. The mountains were different. The vegetation we normally see was gone. David noticed it too because he asked me, "What's going on, Mara? We're not on Highway 95 anymore. Did we take a wrong turn somewhere?" "No way." I was paying attention the entire time until you asked me if I was nervous about telling your family about us eloping. Then when we turned back, the curve was suddenly there until we see a car coming. "Let's go over and check out that trailer. Maybe somebody's there," he said as he pointed to it. As I looked at the trailer, I quickly Noticed something odd and thought this is weird. How did it get there? It's surrounded by rocks big enough they can't be moved by hand. Also, I don't see a road leading to or from it. It looks as if it was picked up and placed there. I didn't say anything to David as I thought he might laugh or dismiss it. Looking back, I'm not sure telling him would have made any difference. Anyway, okay, let's check it out, I hesitantly replied. He then grabbed my hand again and began walking towards the trailer. As we got closer, I could see for sure there was no way the trailer could have been pulled in there by a truck. He didn't seem to notice or act worried if he was hiding at. Well, we walked around it checking it out. Before he went up to the door and was about to knock, I reached out grabbing his arm and said, "No, what are you doing?" "Well, if we want help we have to see if anyone is inside, don't we?" he replied then, almost like deja vu. It hit me. I remember the young man Jay we picked up earlier that day mentioned coming across a green and white trailer in his story right before the horrific events that followed. He mentioned how it was also in an odd spot surrounded by trees with no tire tracks or road leading to it. At that point I felt the surrealness of it all, but I think I was also still in a bit of shock from the crash. I let go of his arm and remember looking over at the sun as it was setting behind the mountain to the west. As he knocked on the door, no sooner had he knocked, the door flew open. There before us stood a man. I was instantly drawn to the whites of his eyes as his glare seemed to burn a hole through us. He had black pants on and was barefoot. His hair was shiny and slick back and the rest of his body was covered in black paint. My attention was then drawn to something on his chest that went down to his stomach. It was an upside down cross and below was the name Malus written on his stomach like he'd written it with his fingers. I grabbed David's hand and started slowly backing up. The man turned and went back in like he was going to get something. I whispered loudly, "Let's get out of here now." He nodded his head as we quickly turned to leave when we heard heavy footsteps in the trailer and a man jumping down coming at us from behind. We instinctively took off running towards the car, maybe because we thought it could provide us with safety. As we crossed the road I heard a loud thump as David crumbled to the ground. "David!" I screamed as I looked down at him when I too was suddenly hit in the back of the head. I sank to my knees as I watched darkness fill up my eyes. When I became conscious again and opened my eyes, I could tell I was blindfolded and tied to a chair. I struggled to break free but was swiftly backhanded across the face, which hurt like hell, adding to my already throbbing head. My mouth was also taped shut as I tried crying out in pain, but there was nothing but muffled noises as sweat poured down my face. I then heard someone walking across the floor, a door being opened and the sounds of rummaging. I knew then I was in the trailer. The footsteps came back and stopped in front of me. "I'm going to die," I thought as I lowered my head in despair. My thoughts quickly turned to David, hoping he was still alive. The person turned, walked a few steps forward and stopped. They said something I couldn't make out then. What sounded like something being struck. Seconds later I recognized the muffled shrieking of David. The first tried screaming to drown out his screams, but with my mouth being taped I could still hear him as it pierced my soul. It seemed to go on forever. He just wouldn't stop. That shook me to my core. It was the worst thing I'd ever heard. When he finally stopped I heard strange noises I couldn't place. They were soft repetitive sounds at first, then what almost sounded like would be sod. The smell of something will hit my nose but quickly turned to something so rank I instantly threw up in my mouth. I had no choice but to swallow it, almost choking as it went back down. I must have passed out because I was awakened some time later to murmuring coming from somewhere in the trailer. A minute later I heard footsteps approaching again, only this time they went behind me. My body tensed up as I thought, "Please don't kill me, please don't kill me." My blindfold was removed and the carnage I saw before me left me horrified and panic-stricken as I struggled breathing through my nose. The dismembered body of David was Laid out in front of me, his severed head gruesomely glaring up at me, his eyes rolled back in his head, his mouth gaped open. I closed my eyes, turning my head, but the person standing behind me grabbed my hair aggressively, yanking my head straight, forcing me to look. Suddenly a deep voice from somewhere in the trailer said something I didn't understand, and I then caught movement out of the corner of my eyes. I slowly turned my head. What I saw crawling on the floor, coming towards me, was something so grotesque my mind couldn't fathom conjuring it up. I closed my eyes, but my head was again yanked hard, forcing me to watch. The thing slowly crawled up to David's dismembered body and began eating it. I almost threw up again as I watched the gruesomeness unfold. This can't be real, this can't be real, I thought over and over to myself. The noise it made as it ate David's body will haunt me forever. A while later it crawled back to where it came from, and I was again blindfolded. The person behind me, who I assume was a painted man, then walked off into another room and shut the door. A few minutes later I heard a humming noise and could feel slight movement. How could we be moving? It's impossible, I thought. I heard nothing over the next several hours except for the humming. Then, without warning, it suddenly stopped. My body tensed up, thinking I was going to face the same brutal death as David. The first, want him back. I don't want to die. We should be in Yuma right now, celebrating. Why is this happening? I thought to myself. All of a sudden a door opened and I heard footsteps along the floor as they approached me, stopping when they got directly in front of me. The tape was then ripped off my mouth and the blindfold pulled down so it was sitting around my neck. As my eyes became adjusted, I could see before me that painted man. He looked exactly as he did before. I looked him straight in the eyes and asked, "Why are you doing this?" After a long silence, he got right in my face. As I smelled his horrid breath, he grabbed me by the chin and replied, "We are the hand of the dark god. We are the dark messiahs. We are the vengeful ones." He put the blindfold back on, cut my restraints, picked me up and started to carry me through the trailer. He then opened the door and stepped down as a smell of fresh air immediately hit my nose. I was dropped to the ground, then heard him walk away, go back inside and close the door. I laid there too frightened to move and afraid to take off the blindfold. When I finally gathered enough strength, I sat up and said aloud to myself, "If I die, I die." As I pulled the blindfold down, I was shocked but relieved to see the trailer was gone. The only thing left were the impressions from the tires in the mud. Judging by my surroundings, it was obvious I wasn't in the desert anymore, but had no idea where I was. Soon after, I heard the sound of a car driving on a road, so I stood up and started walking towards it. When I made it to the highway, I picked a direction and started walking. I walked for a while before being picked up and brought here. The story Jace told everyone in Bullhead City was almost exactly what happened to us. Making David pick him up was a mistake, something I'll live with for the rest of my life. I'll always wonder if his instincts were telling him to keep on driving. Unbelievably, Mara was found in Maine on July 25th, around 24 hours after picking up Jace in Arizona, nearly 3,000 m away. She was aimlessly wandering on highway to between Herman and Carmel. She was taken to the Carmel Sheriff's Department, where she was questioned and told her story. No one there believed her until they found her family in Henderson, Nevada, and the police department in Bed City, Arizona. Her family and the Bullhead police stated she'd left there on July 24th around 2 p.m. The next day, several deputies from the Carmel Sheriff's Department went to the area Mara had described. After several hours of searching, they found Mara's footprints and the trailer's tire impressions in the mud. The area was thick with trees and there were no roads, making it virtually impossible for a trailer to be driven in. There, Mara's parents flew to Maine the following day and took her home. Several days later, the car David and Marlo were driving was never found in Arizona or Maine. David was listed as a missing person, never to be found. For more scary horror stories, thank you for joining DarkWrought Legends. Subscribe for more tales of terror.